land swaps, and with a shared Jerusalem. Secretary of State Rice has said privately, she said it privately, but she also said that she privately urged the Palestinian president to accept the offer, and ex-Prime Minister Olmert has disclosed that he all but begged him to accept it, but nothing happened. The Palestinian recourse to the UN will mean that not only Phase 1 and Phase 2, but Phase 3 of the roadmap will have been discarded. You cannot go to the UN for a determination on a final status issue and have it determined without negotiation and without reference to any other issue and pretend that any phase of the roadmap still remains. So the non-peace, non-process will be not only moribund but dead. Benjamin Netanyahu could offer a new peace plan or new concessions when he speaks to Congress next month, but they will be rejected by the Palestinians out of hand. The U.S. could offer its own peace plan, as the New York Times and J Street are urging President Obama to do, but it will meet the same response and make the U.S. look powerless and foolish in the process. So what do you do if you want the peace process, such as it is, to continue? We'll come back to that. If you look, secondly, at the coming UN resolution through the prism of U.S.-Israeli relations, you will find that the U.S. is virtually committed, through multiple assurances to Israel in connection with prior withdrawals from the West Bank and Gaza, to oppose any plan in the UN that would render the roadmap dead. In 1997, when Israel withdrew from Hebron and turned it over to the Palestinian Authority, the U.S. Secretary of State Warren Christopher issued a formal letter to the Israeli Prime Minister, who was then Benjamin Netanyahu, stating the U.S. position that borders were to be resolved in direct negotiations in which Israel would be entitled to defensible borders. And in 2004, in connection with the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, the U.S. issued another letter to Israel, signed by President Bush, reassuring Israel of the steadfast commitment of the United States to defensible borders and to the roadmap as the sole Middle East peace plan. The term defensible borders is an undefined term, but no one reasonably thinks they are the 1967 lines. So when the Palestinians go to the UN in September, the consequences for U.S.-Israeli relations will be profound if the U.S. permits the adoption of a resolution regarding a Palestinian state with borders that are not only not negotiated, but indefensible as well. The result will be not only the end of the roadmap and the peace process, but a crisis in U.S.-Israeli relations far greater than an announcement of Jewish housing in the Jewish area of the capital of the Jewish state. It is doubtful that any president, especially one who must face the American electorate a year later, would take that course of action. On the other hand, this is a president who made a Palestinian state one of his central foreign policy objectives, literally from this first day in office, and he is someone who agonized over the last resolution the Palestinians brought to the UN just a few months ago. Which brings me to my third prism, the role of the U.S. in world affairs. If the U.S. cannot, this coming September, preserve its own roadmap process and cannot stop a resolution that seeks to have a Palestinian state recognized in a manner that violates not only the provisions of the roadmap, but multiple U.S. assurances to Israel about the outcome of the peace process, then the damage to the United States and its president will be profound, much greater than for much greater than the damage for Israel. For Israel, it will be the adoption of yet another anti-Israel resolution by a notoriously anti-Israel institution that will have no effect on the ground. In the real world, as opposed to the world of UN resolutions, it will make the emergence of a Palestinian state less likely rather than more. For the U.S., however, the consequences will be much more severe. It will be a demonstration of extraordinary diplomatic impotence, particularly after the president personally warned the Palestinians that there would be repercussions if they went to the UN for a resolution last time, have it make more concessions, threaten its prime minister with no Oval Office pictures next month unless he includes significant concessions in his speech to Congress, in the hope that pre-negotiation concessions might convince the Palestinians to resume negotiations that will go nowhere but at least spare you the coming debacle in the UN. But it will be a demonstration that the Palestinians, instead of suffering repercussions, will have shown that they can get the United States once again to lean on its own ally, and it will not be the last time that strategy is employed either by the Palestinians or by others. So there is another approach that, in my view, would be more productive for both Israel and the United States. Israel is currently dealing with an unelected West Bank president about to start the 76th month of his 48-month term, who rules by decree and lacks the political legitimacy to engage in serious negotiations, even assuming he wanted to. And you have Gaza ruled by a terrorist group that is sworn to destroy Israel. But they have now announced a unity government and a commitment to hold an election within the coming year. It is doubtful, in my view, that Fatah and Hamas can live side by side in peace and security with each other, much less with Israel. But the surest way to find out, in my view, is to proceed to hold that election. So in his speech to Congress, Netanyahu should reiterate that there cannot be two states if the Palestinian one is not ready or willing to recognize a Jewish one with defensible borders, that both Democratic and Republican administrations have formally assured Israel must emerge from direct negotiations, and that the Palestinians should proceed to hold the elections that they have now agreed to hold, and to elect leaders willing to recognize Israel, renounce terrorism, and abide by all prior agreements, or not. Netanyahu should say that the place for further concessions is not in a speech, but in negotiations with a democratically elected Palestinian authority prepared to make concessions in return, and he should express the hope that the Palestinians will elect a government with the authority to negotiate on that basis. And the United States should respond that the way forward is not an empty UN resolution that will kill the peace process, but the establishment by the Palestinians of a functioning democracy. Because if you are not able to hold an election or to elect leaders committed to peace with your neighbor, then you are obviously not ready for a state, either as a matter of law or as a matter of politics. And the repercussions in that event ought to be obvious. So the title of this evening's presentation refers to a crisis coming in September, but in my view the key events will happen next month, with Netanyahu's speech to Congress and Obama's reaction to it. And only if both countries make it clear at that time that the UN gambit of the Palestinians is not an acceptable way to proceed, only in that way can either country avoid the crisis that's coming in September. It seems to me that the worst way for Israel to proceed is to negotiate with itself and offer up concessions that will be both pocketed and declared insufficient at the same time. It is better to announce adherence to a certain overriding principle, recognition of a Palestinian state in exchange for reciprocal recognition of a Jewish state with defensible borders, and pronounce yourself willing to negotiate with the Palestinians once they demonstrate their own commitment to that principle in a new election that is already more than 2 years overdue, and which the Palestinians, all of them, have told us this week they are prepared to hold. Such an election will, in my view, produce what used to be called moral clarity, and it will have the important side benefit of getting us past the coming crisis in September. Thank you.
Thank you very much to that wonderful panel. The next thing on the agenda is what we're going to call the lightning round, and that will allow each of the three panelists to respond to the points of interest for him from what the others have said. What I'd like to do is take about 5 minutes for each gentleman in turn to make some points that he came up with listening to the others, and then open it up for just discussion between them. And we want to keep this whole thing to about 20-25 minutes with the making the points and the discussion. So we'll do that, and then as soon as that's done, we'll open it up to Q&A, which Doris will honcho for us. Avi, if you'll go first. Okay.
I wanted to actually respond to what Rick just talked about. I guess this is a little bit out of my field. I should be talking about law, but I'm going to be talking about politics. And this is because I think the name of the game here is, in fact, politics. So what is it that's going on in September? I'm not sure that I see it the same way that Rick does. What is the game that is being played? Is this a game for another anti-resolution? I don't think it's a game for another anti-resolution. What is it that the Palestinians are attempting to achieve? What they're attempting to achieve is the Goldstone effect. What is the Goldstone effect? It is you make some ridiculous claims and you dress them up in fancy legal language in an attempt to get third-party actors to do things for you. So it's not about, it doesn't end with the language. It ends with what the third parties are going to do for you. The Goldstone report is supposed to end with Israeli leaders being arrested. The Palestinian state gambit is supposed to end with sanctions, diplomatic and economic, against the state of Israel. I think that's where the game is being played. Now, who is supposed to engage in sanctioning Israel? Who is supposed to impose these diplomatic and economic sanctions on Israel? I think that it's supposed to be the states of Europe, the ones that see these kinds of empty rhetorical devices as meaningful. Now, what can be done? I think that it's probably true that one way not to confront this is to try to concede some political gesture. It's because it's not about the Israeli concession. It's about the rhetoric as part of an ongoing diplomatic conflict. I think that a better way is to confront the emptiness behind the rhetoric, to try to force those third parties, the Europeans in this case, to be embarrassed if they follow, in fact, the gambit that the Palestinians are proposing. Now, I really think is saying this about the U.S., that one of the things to try to do is force the U.S. to confront that it will be embarrassed if it supports this. And I have to say that it may be a little bit late here, because if we're talking about the U.S. being losing credibility by supporting it, well, the U.S. should be losing credibility earlier. Rick says, well, let's look at what happened. Let's see what, maybe we're best off by looking at what happens in the elections between the Fatah and Hamas. Now, the U.S. made some commitments on the PLO before it made commitments about a Palestinian state. Now, these are the commitments the U.S. made on the PLO. The U.S. recognition of the PLO is based on PLO forswearing violence and terrorism. Now, there is a member organization of the PLO called the Palestinian Front for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Now, Israel just arrested the two terrorists that murdered the Fogel family less than a month ago, and they are PFLP terrorists, a member organization of the PLO. Now, under U.S. law, that means the U.S. has to withdraw its contacts with the PLO, whose chairman, by the way, is the gentleman that Rick mentioned, the person now entering his 76th month of his 48-month term as president of the Palestinian Authority. That would be Mahmoud Abbas, chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization. Now, is the U.S. going to do this? I don't think so. Now, we talk about Fatah as if it's the peaceful alternative to Hamas. Hamas, there's no doubt, is a terrorist organization, but you may be surprised to know that more Israelis were killed by Fatah terrorists in the last decade than Hamas terrorists. That doesn't mean that Hamas is good guys. It means that maybe Fatah is not good guys.